Hello and welcome to this on-demand recording for the Generation 2 core exams for Education and Early Years T-Level. I'm Elena Bennett and I work as a Provider Development Officer at NCFE. In this short overview, I'll walk you through the key changes to the core content and its assessment as part of the new specification due for first teaching in 2025. So in this session, we'll cover the main changes to the core exam content, updates to how this content will be assessed, and some useful information about future resources, key dates, and where to find support. Whether you're already delivering this T-level or preparing to deliver the new specification, this update is essential viewing. With the content changes to the Education in Early Years T-level in Generation 2, there also comes some corresponding updates to assessment. So the structure and delivery of core assessments has evolved to better reflect the needs of students and to improve the manageability of exam preparation and delivery. We'll look at specifically how this affects the core exams in this video. There's a separate video that will break down the employer set project in more depth. So this slide summarises the structure and weighting changes. We can see that the core exam has changed from 2 2-hour papers and is now 1 2.5-hour paper. And the overall weighting of the exam has also changed and is now worth 60% of the core rather than the 70% that it was in Generation 1. One of the key updates in Generation 2 is to the core content itself. Some areas have been revised or reorganised to ensure alignment with current sector needs and clarity in delivery. The 12 elements from Generation 1 are now condensed into 7 elements for Generation 2. It's important to review the updated specification in detail to familiarise yourself with any new inclusions or removed elements. The core exam will examine elements 2 to 6, with elements 1 and 7 being examined in the ESP. Although specification content from elements 1 and 7 will not be explicitly examined within the core exam, please be aware that students will need an underpinning knowledge of these elements in terms of how they apply to other elements in a wider context. We have created a guidance document containing more detail around how the Generation 2 core elements align with the Generation 1 specification. Where applicable, we have mapped the new core elements to the Generation 1 core elements to support planning and delivery for providers who have been delivering the qualification before the introduction of the updated specification. The Generation 2 specification should always be used alongside this guidance to obtain further information regarding the subject content and to inform delivery of this qualification from September 2025. The links to both the guidance document and the specification can be found on this slide. These next few slides demonstrate how the 12 elements from the Generation 1 specification have been merged, moved or aligned to the new Generation 2 specification. This may be useful in supporting you with planning and schemes of work. So starting with element 1, this introduces learners to the broader education landscape. In Generation 2, this content has been streamlined to remove duplication and ensure clearer alignment with the practical realities of the education sector. It now sits entirely within the employer set project, meaning it will no longer appear in the core written exam. This change allows for a more applied exploration of the wider sector context. However, as mentioned on the previous slide, please be aware that students will require an underpinning knowledge of the content within this element so that they are able to apply it to the other elements in a wider context. Element 2 remains a substantial and vital part of the core, covering approaches to supporting learners in education settings. There's a stronger emphasis now on inclusive practice and the different ways practitioners support teaching and learning. There's also clearer links between this element and what learners observe and experience during their industry placement. And this slide is a continuation of element 2 from the previous slide. And now moving on to element 3. Safeguarding remains a fundamental theme, but in Generation 2 it is now more integrated with equality, diversity and inclusion and well-being, recognising how interconnected these responsibilities are in practice. You should find clearer signposting in the specification as to how EDI considerations impact safeguarding responses and the role of practitioners in promoting well-being proactively. And this slide is a continuation of element 3. In element 4, SEND has been given a more defined structure in Generation 2, with updates reflecting current best practice and legislation. Expect more detailed content around identifying needs, differentiation strategies, and collaborative working with families and external agencies. This should better prepare learners for inclusive practice in both education and early years contexts. And this slide is element 4 continued from the previous slide. Element 5. Child development remains core to the T level, but we've adjusted the sequencing and focus to improve progression. There's now an increased emphasis on the interrelationships between different areas of development and how these are influenced by both internal and external factors. This section also aims to improve how students connect theory to practice during placement. And this is element 5 continued from the previous slide. Element 6. Working in partnership is about preparing learners for the collaborative nature of education and care roles. This element highlights multi-agency working, parent partnerships and the role of professionals beyond the classroom. The content has been refined for clarity and relevance, including practical examples that students may encounter on placement. And in Unit 7, Professional Practice covers the behaviours, values and expectations of those working in the sector. In Generation 2, this content is now removed from the written exam and instead assessed through the ESP, allowing a more reflective and scenario-based approach. This aligns more closely with the kinds of professionalism required in real-world settings. So moving on to some of the key changes to the core exam. Firstly, there will now just be one core exam and it will last 2.5 hours. This streamlines the assessment process while still allowing enough time to assess understanding across a broader range of content. Secondly, elements 1 and 7 have been removed from the core exam. These elements are now assessed within the employer set project. This change is designed to assess these more applied and professional practice-based elements in a format that better suits their nature. The exam itself is split into 4 sections. Each section begins with a 1-mark question, either a standalone short answer or a multiple choice, and ends with a 12-mark extended response question. This creates a clear progression in demand throughout each section, helping to scaffold the learner's response. In terms of marks, the total available is 140. This is made up of 128 marks from the questions and an additional 12 marks for the quality of written communication, the QWC mark, and this is assessed in the 12-mark extended response questions. We're also seeing the reintroduction of the A-B style question. In this format, Part B includes a scenario and Part A is now a 2-mark AO1 understand question, which means learners must demonstrate comprehension, not just recall. The 6-mark AO3 questions, i.e. those requiring higher level thinking like analysis or evaluation, will now have a marking grid to support clearer and more consistent assessment. And a key shift is that there will be fewer AO1 knowledge in isolation questions. These are simple recall tasks. And instead, there's a stronger focus on the AO1 understand questions. This ensures that learners are not only remembering information, but also showing they grasp its meaning and relevance. And lastly, there will be one maths-based question in the paper, assessing applied numeracy in the context of education and early years. And just for information, we'll have a quick overview of some of the command verbs you would expect to see in the questions. For AO1, in terms of a knowledge-based question, you'd expect to see state, identify, or give one example of. For AO1 understanding, you'll see the same verbs but with greater depth expected. In AO2, you would expect to see explain or describe, and AO3 is where you see higher order thinking, for example, discuss, evaluate, analyse and assess. And these command verbs signal the cognitive demand and will help you and your learners pitch the responses appropriately. So now we're going to have a look at the structure of the different sorts of questions that you would expect to see on the exam. So each section of the exam will begin with either a simple AO1 knowledge in isolation or multiple choice question. And these knowledge in isolation questions draw their answers directly from the specification wording. An example of such a question is given here, and this is identify one reason why it's important to use up-to-date and appropriate technology to support children's education. For this type of AO1 question, the mark scheme will be a direct copy and paste straight from the specification. The AO1 understand questions require students to demonstrate comprehension of a concept rather than just recall. Again, an example is given here for illustration. So this question requires students to give 2 reasons why children may experience changes in routine when living as part of a blended family. The question here will be created using a bullet point from the specification, and the mark scheme will be created from relevant knowledge and understanding. And AO3 6-mark questions will use a marking grid to support consistency. This example shows how the indicative content and the marking grid will be structured for these questions. So we'll move on to look at the structure of the new core exam as a whole. So here's a visual example of how the new structure looks in practice. We'll have a look at the first line there, which is section A. So section A combines elements 2 and 6. It includes a combination of multiple choice questions or short answer questions, as well as an extended response question. The total marks for this section are 36, plus 3 marks for the quality of written communication. And in terms of distribution, element 2 contributes between 22 and 26 marks, and element 6 contributes between 8 and 12 marks. So this is a tolerance range of 34 to 38 marks in total. The marks are mapped across AO1, AO2 and AO3 as follows. So AO1, the recall and understanding, is between 9 to 12 marks. AO2, as in application, is 12 to 15 marks, and AO3, the analysis and evaluation, is 10 to 13 marks within that section of the paper. Then you can see for sections B, C and D the breakdowns are on the screen now. Again, each section has a mix of multiple choice questions, short answer questions and extended response questions. In total, the exam is worth 140 marks, including the 12 quality of written communication marks spread across the 4 extended response questions. And the total exam time is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Each section ensures a balanced coverage of the assessment objectives AO1, AO2 and AO3, with some flexibility in the mark ranges to allow for consistent yet adaptable question setting. This table is really useful for planning, delivery and assessment practice. It shows not just which elements are assessed, but also how much cognitive demand is placed on students for each section. So use this to inform how much time and depth you spend on each element during teaching. Now we'll move on to general support around the Generation 2 qualification. So this page shows the link to the qualification page on the NCFE website. Here you'll find the updated specification, sample materials and links to additional support. It's worth bookmarking this as your go-to resource hub. Supporting documents for this qualification will be released in phases, so please keep checking the qualification page. These resources will include exemplar materials, delivery guidance and support packs to help you confidently prepare for September 2025 delivery. There will also be resources aligned to the new core elements, including session plans, e-learning and PowerPoint presentations, and activity sheets. There's also a link here to the YouTube playlist, which is specific to Generation 2. To support you further, we're offering 2 live support sessions in August. These events are free to attend and available for booking now via our events page. The link is on the slide. All sessions will be recorded and added to our Generation 2 YouTube playlist for future viewing. And please remember, if you need tailored support, you can book a curriculum call with our provider development team. These one-to-one sessions can help address specific questions around planning delivery or preparing for assessments. We'd also encourage you to join our community of best practice. This network is a great way to share insights, resources and delivery approaches with fellow providers across the country. And don't forget, make sure your centre's contact information is up to date so the right team members receive NCFE communications. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Your feedback is really valuable to us, so please complete the short feedback form on the screen linked to this session. Your input will help us shape a support we offer moving forward. Thank you again and hope you found it useful.